The rain was a cold fury, 1,000 icy needles against Alara's skin. It hammered the forest floor, turning soil to sucking mud that stole the breath from her lungs and the strength from her legs. Every ragged gasp was a victory, every stumbling step a defiance. Behind her, the dogs bayed. Their cries were sharp, hungry sounds that ripped through the storm's roar, each one a promise of teeth and tearing flesh. They belonged to him, Warden Valerius. The name was a brand of its own, seared into her mind just as his iron had seared her flesh. She clutched her arm, the sodden rags of her sleeve doing nothing to soothe the screaming pain of the fresh wound beneath. A symbol of purity, he had called it, a mark to cleanse the stain of her bloodline. The lie tasted like bile and blood in her mouth. She ran. She ran from the sterile white cells of the Argent Bastion, from the cold eyes that saw her not as a person but as a tool, a weapon to be honed, a key to unlock a war. Her ancestor had made a pact, a foolish, noble bargain struck in a forgotten age. A human woman had saved a king of shadows from the sun's lethal kiss. In return, he had sworn an oath. A single drop of his blood, given in gratitude, had mingled with her family's line. A dormant promise passed down through generations. A debt of life. Valerius had discovered it. He saw not an oath of protection but a leash. A connection to the reclusive vampire King Theron that he could twist, exploit, and use to provoke a final cleansing war. He wanted her blood to be the first spilled on that new battlefield. She would not let it happen. The trees thinned abruptly, giving way to a sheer cliff face of glistening black rock that seemed to drink the very light from the storm. A dead end. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her exhaustion. The dogs were closer now, their barking frantic, excited. They had her cornered. Her eyes scanned the rock wall, searching for any handhold, any crack or crevice that might offer escape. There was nothing, only a fissure, a dark wound in the stone barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. From it bled a strange, cold air, smelling of deep earth, ancient stone, and something else. Something metallic and still, like a forgotten secret. With no other choice, she plunged into the darkness. The passage was tight, its walls slick with moisture and unnaturally smooth, as if worn down by more than just time. The barking of the dogs grew muffled, then faded entirely, swallowed by the profound silence within the rock. The air grew colder. After a few feet, the passage opened into a vast, cavernous space. Light, pale and ethereal, bloomed ahead. It was not sunlight, nor torchlight. It was a cold, silver luminescence that seemed to emanate from the very stones, from veins of crystal embedded in the soaring walls of a colossal hall. She had done the unthinkable. She had stumbled out of the mortal world and into the heart of the legend itself. Before her was a court of impossibly beautiful, terrifyingly still figures. They were gathered in a great hall carved from the heart of the mountain, a place of Gothic arches and obsidian floors polished to a mirror sheen. Crystal goblets filled with a liquid the color of rubies caught the spectral candlelight. All of them, every single one, had turned to stare at her. Their eyes were the colors of jewels, of winter storms, of twilight skies, and they held no warmth, only shock, and a predatory ancient hunger. Her sudden appearance, a ragged, mud-streaked human girl bleeding on their pristine floor, had frozen them in place. A collective hiss, soft as rustling silk, rippled through the hall. It was the sound of contempt, of disgust. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum in the cathedral-like silence. She had traded one predator for 100. But at the far end of the hall, seated on a throne of unadorned, jagged obsidian, was him, King Theron. He was exactly as the forbidden stories described. His stillness was absolute, a predator's perfect patience. Long, raven-black hair framed a face of stark, aristocratic beauty, a mask of carved marble that had not seen the sun in a millennium. His eyes, the color of a storm-tossed sea, were fixed on her. They held no surprise, only a vast, weary emptiness, the profound isolation of ages. A desperate woman, branded and broken, had breached the veil of shadow and legend to collapse at the feet of a vampire king. She had to try, ignoring the hostile glares, the bared fangs visible in the dim light, Alara took a staggering step forward. And another. She left a trail of muddy water and her own blood on the perfect floor. A tall, severe-looking vampire with silver hair stepped into her path. His face was a mask of cold fury. "You defile this hall, human," he snarled, his voice a low growl. "Your life is forfeit." Alara ignored him. Her focus was singular, absolute. She looked past the guard, past the assembled nobles, to the silent figure on the throne. She pleaded for a life debt centuries old, knowing what she was about to do would either save her or see her torn apart in seconds. She raised her injured arm, the one bearing Valerius's brand. With her last reserve of strength, she tore a strip of her tunic, bit her own thumb, and drew a line of fresh blood over the seared flesh. Then, she spoke, her voice a raw, desperate whisper that carried in the unnatural silence. "I am of the line of Annalise, a name from a forgotten time. My blood is her blood." She held her arm out, an offering and a demand. "By the oath sworn in sun and shadow, by the life given and the life owed, I claim sanctuary." The entire hall went silent. It was a silence so deep it felt like the world had stopped breathing. The silver-haired noble, Lord Forlag, stared at her, his aristocratic face a canvas of disbelief and outrage. He turned his gaze to the throne, expecting, demanding a swift and brutal judgment. "Insolence!" Another noble hissed from the crowd, a beautiful woman with eyes like chips of obsidian. "The king owes nothing to vermin." A murmur of agreement rippled through the court. It was a sound like stones grinding together, full of menace and ancient pride. They saw her as filth, an interruption, a meal that had wandered into the feasting hall. But Theron did not move. His gaze remained locked on Alara, on the line of fresh blood she had drawn upon her arm. He could feel it, a faint, spectral echo across the centuries, an old warmth in his cold, dead veins. The oath. He had not thought of it in 500 years. A memory surfaced, sharp and unwelcome. The searing agony of the sun on his skin, a moment of youthful arrogance that had nearly cost him his existence. A mortal woman, her face filled with terror and pity, dragging him into the shade of a root cellar. Annalise. She had saved him. And he, in a moment of profound, uncharacteristic gratitude, had made a promise. He had sworn his blood, his power, his very name to the protection of her line, should they ever have need of it. It was a vow of honor, and in his long, unchanging life, honor was one of the few things that still held any meaning. Lord Forlag finally broke the silence, his voice sharp with authority. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing his head slightly, but his eyes were challenging. "This creature is delusional. It speaks of fairy tales. Let us dispose of it and return to matters of state." "Dispose of it?" a younger, more eager vampire asked, his eyes gleaming. "A waste. She smells of the storm and desperation. A fine vintage." Alara flinched, pulling her arm back instinctively. Her courage was a flickering candle flame, and their cold contempt was the wind that threatened to extinguish it. She kept her eyes on the king. He was her only hope, her only chance. Finally, Theron moved. He rose from his obsidian throne, a slow, deliberate motion that commanded the absolute attention of every being in the hall. He was taller than she had imagined, a figure of lean, predatory grace wrapped in shadows. He descended the few steps from the dais, his movements utterly silent. He stopped before her, so close she could feel the profound cold that emanated from him, a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. It was the cold of the grave, the cold of eternity. He looked down at her, his face an unreadable mask. Then, he reached out a hand, his long, pale fingers gently taking her wrist. His touch was like ice, but there was no revulsion in it. Only a clinical, ancient curiosity. He turned her arm over, his thumb tracing the edge of the warden's brand. His eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "The Argent Order," he said, his voice a low baritone, like the tolling of a distant bell. It was the first time he had spoken. The sound vibrated through the very stones of the hall. He recognized the mark. "They hunt you," he stated. It was not a question. Alara could only nod, her throat too tight to form words. Theron released her arm. He turned to face his court, his storm-gray eyes sweeping over them. The predatory eagerness, the haughty disdain, all of it vanished from their faces, replaced by impassive obedience. "She speaks the truth," Theron announced, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "The oath is real. A life was given. A debt is owed." Forlag took a half-step forward, his face a tight mask of disbelief. "Majesty, you cannot be serious. An ancient sentimentality? For a human? She brings the scent of our enemies to our very door." "I am aware of what she brings, Lord Forlag," Theron replied, his voice dropping, taking on an edge as sharp as broken glass. "I am also aware of my word." He paused, letting the weight of his statement settle over the court. "The human," he declared, his gaze finding Alara again, "is under my protection. Unthinkable. Unprecedented." A gasp went through the assembly. The king, who had not concerned himself with the affairs of a single human in centuries, had just claimed this bleeding, bedraggled creature as his own. Before anyone could protest further, a commotion came from the great entrance of the hall. A vampire guard, clad in silver-etched armor, hurried forward, bowing low before the throne. "Your Majesty, humans are at the gate. Soldiers of the Argent Order. They demand entry. They claim they are hunting a fugitive." Every eye in the hall turned back to Alara. She shrank back, her momentary relief dissolving into pure terror. They had followed her. Valerius had found her. A cruel smile touched Forlag's lips. "It seems the matter will resolve itself, Your Majesty. Her world has come to reclaim her." Theron's eyes were chips of ice. He looked not at the guard, nor at Forlag, but at the main gates, as if he could see through the mountain itself. "They demand?" he repeated softly, dangerously. Without another word, he began to walk toward the entrance. The assembled court parted before him like water before the prow of a ship. Alara, frozen in place, watched him go. A fierce-looking woman with a warrior's build and a stark, loyal face moved to stand beside her. "Stay here," the woman, Captain Lyra, commanded. Her voice was stern, but not unkind. "The king will deal with this." The great doors of the hall, carved with scenes of forgotten battles, swung open on silent hinges. Beyond them lay a long tunnel leading to the mountain's hidden gate. Theron strode into the tunnel, his form silhouetted against the raging storm outside. At the gate, a dozen men stood, clad in the white and silver of the Argent Order. Their leader stepped forward, a man with a face full of cruel piety and a fanatical light in his eyes. Warden Valerius. He did not seem intimidated by the sudden appearance of the Vampire King. He seemed thrilled. This was the confrontation he had craved. "King Theron," Valerius said, his voice loud and self-righteous. "We mean you no harm. We track a dangerous heretic, a creature of tainted blood. She has trespassed on your lands. Surrender her to our justice, and we shall depart in peace." Theron stopped just inside the threshold of his domain. The rain did not touch him. "There is no heretic here," Theron said, his voice calm and deadly. Valerius's smile was thin and sharp. "She is a young woman, frightened, marked by our order for her own good. Her name is Alara. We know she is here." He was using propaganda already, painting her as a confused child, himself as a righteous savior. "The only human within my mountain," Theron replied, his voice like the grinding of glaciers, "is a guest." "A guest?" Valerius laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "She is a weapon, a key, and she belongs to us. Her blood is an abomination that we mean to purify." Theron took a single step forward, out of the shadow of the gate and into the dim light of the storm. The air temperature dropped several degrees. "She is of the line of Annalise," Theron stated, his voice devoid of all emotion save a terrible finality. "Her blood is bound to mine by an oath you could not possibly comprehend." He met Valerius's fanatical gaze with the cold, empty weight of 1,000 years. "She is mine now." The declaration hung in the air, absolute and irrevocable. "Leave," Theron commanded, "or be removed." Valerius's face contorted with rage. This was not how he had envisioned this. He had expected defiance, a monster's snarl. Not this cold, regal dismissal. Not this claim of ownership that sounded more like law than a threat. For a moment he considered ordering his men to attack. But he saw the shadows behind the king shifting, saw the glint of dozens of pairs of predatory eyes. He saw the sheer, ancient power radiating from the being before him. It was not yet time. "You are making a grave mistake, Shadow Dweller," Valerius snarled. "You are harboring a blight. The world of men will hear of this. They will hear how you stole an innocent and hid her in your den of sin." Theron remained silent. He simply waited. With a final, venomous glare, Valerius turned and motioned for his men to withdraw. They retreated into the storm, their forms quickly swallowed by the rain and darkness. Theron watched until they were gone. Then he turned and walked back into the hall, the great doors closing behind him, sealing the mountain once more. He found Alara exactly where he had left her, guarded by the silent Captain Lyra. The court was a sea of tense, hostile faces. They had heard everything. Theron walked past them all, his gaze fixed on Alara. "Come," he said, his voice softer now, but still a command. He turned and led her away from the main hall, down a quiet, torchlit corridor. Lyra followed at a respectful distance. Alara stumbled after him, her mind reeling. She was safe, for now. But she had not found a sanctuary. She had found the eye of the storm. Theron led her to a set of tall, oak doors and pushed them open. He gestured for her to enter. The room was a library, a vast, circular chamber lined from floor to ceiling with books, scrolls, and leather-bound tomes. A fire crackled in a large stone hearth, casting a warm, flickering light that felt alien in this place of cold stone and colder beings. It was a pocket of warmth in a frozen world. "You will stay here," Theron said. "No one will enter without my permission. You are safe within these walls." Alara looked around, overwhelmed. The sheer age of the room was a palpable presence. It smelled of old paper, leather, and dust, the scent of time itself. "Why?" she whispered, finding her voice at last. "Why are you doing this? The oath. It's just words from a dead time." Theron turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "To you, perhaps," he said. "To me, words are the only things that last. Honor is the only currency with any true value." He gestured to a small table where a silver tray sat, laden with a pitcher of water, a loaf of bread, and a wedge of cheese. Mortal food. Someone had anticipated this. "Eat, rest," he commanded. "We will speak more when you have recovered your strength." He turned to leave. "Wait," Alara called out, a flicker of her earlier desperation returning. "Valerius, he won't stop. He told me what he wants. He wants to use me, my connection to you, to prove that your kind are monsters who steal humans. He wants a war." Theron paused at the door. "I am aware of what men like Valerius want," he said, his back still to her. "They have wanted it for centuries." He glanced back over his shoulder, his eyes catching the firelight. "Let him try." The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Alara alone in the profound, echoing silence of the library. The immediate threat was gone, but the weight of what she had done, of where she was, pressed down on her. She was a piece in a game she did not understand, played by ancient, powerful beings. A pawn between a fanatic and a king. Exhaustion, deep and absolute, finally claimed her. She staggered to a worn leather armchair near the fire, sank into its depths, and was asleep before she could even reach for the bread. Outside in the corridor, Theron stood for a long moment, his hands still on the door. He could hear the frantic, fragile beat of her human heart. It was a sound he had not heard in this part of his citadel for a very long time. A vulnerable, mortal sound. He found Lord Forlag waiting for him, his face a thunderous mask. "You cannot be serious," Forlag hissed, his voice low and urgent. "You would risk a war with the Argent Order for the sake of a sentimental promise made to a long-dead peasant. The rank of the one to whom an oath is sworn is irrelevant, Forlag," Theron replied, his voice calm and cold. "The rank of the one who swears it is all that matters. This is madness." The council will not stand for it. The girl is a liability. She is a beacon, drawing our enemies to our gates. Then our gates will hold, Theron said simply. He started to walk away, but Forlag moved to block his path. Theron, he said, his voice dropping the formal title, a sign of his deep agitation. We have survived for 2,000 years by being silent, by being shadows, by not interfering in the petty squabbles of humanity. You are violating our most fundamental law of survival. Theron stopped, his gaze pinning Forlag in place. We have not survived, old friend, he said, a profound weariness in his tone. We have endured. There is a difference. He left Forlag standing alone in the corridor, a statue of impotent fury. Theron retreated not to the throne room, but to his private study. It was a stark, Spartan room, containing only a desk, a chair, and a single large window carved from the mountainside. The window was made of a crystal so pure it was nearly invisible, offering a panoramic view of the storm-lashed valley below. He stood before it, watching the lightning split the sky. He was not a sentimentalist. Forlag was right about that. The centuries had burned such weaknesses out of him, leaving only pragmatism and the cold, hard logic of survival. But the girl, Alara, had spoken the name, Annalise, and she had drawn blood on her arm, an echo of the rite he himself had performed when he swore the oath. It was a direct invocation, a challenge to his honor he could not ignore without becoming something he despised. A king without his word was merely a tyrant, a beast with a crown. He had seen such creatures, both human and vampire, rise and fall over the millennia. He would not become one of them, but the cost of this honor was high. Forlag was also right about the danger. The Argent Order was more than a band of fanatics. They were disciplined, well-funded, and their influence in the human kingdoms had grown unchecked for decades. They had political power. Warden Valerius was no mere soldier. He was an ideologue, and men like him were the most dangerous of all. He would use this incident, twisting it into a tale of monstrous abduction. He would paint Theron as a predator, Alara as his victim. He would rally the fearful, ignorant masses and turn them into an army that would bleed and die against the Citadel's walls, but not before exposing his kingdom to a world that had largely forgotten it existed. Exposure was a death sentence, a slow, inexorable one. He rested his forehead against the cold crystal of the window. The weight of his crown, of his long, lonely reign, felt heavier than it had in centuries. His people were ancient, powerful, and proud, but they were few. They had dwindled over the ages, victims of past wars, plagues, and their own inability to procreate with the ease of mortals. They were a dying race, hiding in the heart of a mountain, clinging to the shadows. Protecting them was his only purpose, his sacred duty. And now, that duty was in direct conflict with his personal honor. To protect his people, he should have given them the girl. He should have thrown her to the wolves and sealed the gates. But he could not. The image of her standing before him, so small and terrified, yet so defiant, was burned into his mind. The way she had met his gaze, not with the terror he was used to, but with a desperate plea for something she had every right to demand. It had stirred something in him, something long dormant, a memory of the man he had been before he became a king, before he became a monster. He made his choice. He would honor the oath. He would protect the girl. And he would weather the storm that was to come. Let them come. Let them break themselves against the walls of his mountain. His kingdom had slept long enough. Perhaps it was time to remind the world of men why their ancestors had learned to fear the night. Alara awoke to the soft crackling of the fire. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The scent of old books and wood smoke was a gentle comfort. Then memory returned, crashing down on her like a physical weight. The flight, the court of vampires, the king. She sat up, her muscles aching in protest. A thick, woolen blanket had been draped over her. She hadn't put it there. The thought sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. On the table, the food was untouched. Her hunger, once a gnawing beast, had been replaced by a knot of anxiety in her stomach. She forced herself to get up and walk to the table. She drank the water, the cool liquid a balm to her raw throat. She broke off a piece of bread and ate it slowly, mechanically. She needed her strength. As she ate, her eyes roamed the library. It was a place of profound peace, a stark contrast to the terror she had fled and the cold hostility of the court. She ran her fingers along the spine of a book. The leather was cracked with age. The title was in a language she didn't recognize, its script elegant and flowing. This was his space. The king's. It was a place of knowledge, of history. It felt different from the cold, imposing man who had brought her here. Felt human. The doors opened without a sound. Theron stood there, holding a small wooden box. He was dressed more simply now, in a dark tunic and trousers, without the regal trappings of the court. It somehow made him seem more imposing, his power less diffused by ceremony. He walked over to the fire and gestured for her to sit in the armchair. She obeyed, her heart starting to beat a little faster. He knelt before her, a gesture so unexpected it stole her breath. A king, kneeling before her. He opened the box. Inside were clean bandages, a small pot of dark salve, and a flask of wine. "Your arm," he said, his voice quiet. She hesitated, then slowly unwrapped the rags from her branded arm. The wound was ugly, a red, inflamed symbol of the Argent Order's cross and sword. Theron looked at it, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of emotion in his eyes. It was a cold, controlled fury, more terrifying than any overt display of rage. "They brand their victims like cattle," he murmured, his voice a low growl. He took a clean cloth, poured some of the wine on it, and began to gently clean the wound. His touch was surprisingly gentle, his movements precise and economical. Alara flinched as the wine stung the raw flesh. "Forgive me," he said, his voice still low. He worked in silence for a few moments. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the soft whisper of the cloth against her skin. The intimacy of the moment was unnerving. Here was this ancient, feared creature, the monster from children's nightmares, tending to her wound with the care of a physician. "Valerius believes my bloodline is a corruption," she said quietly, needing to fill the silence. "He thinks it's a stain that must be purged by fire. He wanted to use me, to provoke you." Theron did not look up from his work. "He mistakes an oath of honor for a taint of the blood," he said. "It is a typical failing of fanatics. They see the world in absolutes of light and shadow, and cannot comprehend the shades of gray where truth resides." He finished cleaning the wound and took a small amount of the dark, herbal salve on his fingers. It was cool against her feverish skin, and the pain began to recede almost instantly. "What is this?" she asked. "A poultice of mountain herbs," he replied. "It will prevent infection and lessen the scar." He began to wrap her arm in clean linen bandages, his movements deft and sure. "You are not what I expected," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. He paused, his hands still on her arm. He finally looked up, his storm-gray eyes meeting hers. "And what did you expect?" "A monster," she said honestly. "A creature of legend. Cold. Cruel." A faint ghost of a smile touched his lips. It was a sad, fleeting thing. "I have been called all of those things," he said. "And at times I have been all of those things. A very long life gives one the opportunity to be many things. Alara of the line of Annalise." He finished wrapping the bandage and tied it off. His hands lingered for a moment on her arm before he drew them back. The first genuine connection had been forged, not through an ancient oath, but through a simple, quiet act of care. It was a flicker of empathy that broke through his centuries of emotional armor, and a flicker of trust that broke through her fear. The peace of the library, however, was a fragile illusion. Beyond its walls, Warden Valerius was not idle. He had withdrawn his soldiers, but his war had already begun. He sent riders to the nearest human towns, their mouths full of righteous fury. The story they told was simple, powerful, and utterly false. They spoke of a pious, innocent girl, a ward of the Argent Order, cruelly abducted by the legendary Shadow King of the mountain. They described a monster who had snatched a human lamb from their flock, dragging her into his dark den. They conveniently omitted Alara's flight, her brand, her desperate plea for sanctuary. Propaganda was a weapon far more insidious than any sword. It preyed on old fears, on the superstitions that lingered in the hearts of even the most modern of men. The tale spread like wildfire. Pulpits in village churches rang with condemnations of the Shadow King. Wanted posters appeared in town squares, bearing a crude but effective sketch of Alara's face, labeling her as the lost innocent. Valerius was framing Theron as the villain, and himself as the champion of humanity who would brave the monster's lair to rescue her. He was building his army not with conscription, but with righteous fervor. Inside the mountain citadel, the court was simmering with dissent. Theron's decree of protection had been a shock. The news of Valerius's public accusations, brought by scouts who moved like ghosts in the human world, was the spark that threatened to ignite a rebellion. Lord Forlag requested an audience with the king in the council chamber. It was not a request. It was a demand. He was not alone. He was flanked by half a dozen of the oldest, most powerful nobles of the court, including the ambitious Duke Kalen, a vampire whose lineage was nearly as old as Theron's. The human world is stirring, Forlag began, dispensing with pleasantries. This warden Valerius is a master of lies. He is painting you as a kidnapper, a beast of legend preying on human maidens. He is uniting the villages against us. Words are wind, Theron replied, his voice calm as he sat upon his throne. Not these words, Forlag countered, his voice rising. These are words that sharpen pitchforks and light torches. He is giving them a cause, a holy crusade. For centuries we have survived by being a myth. You have made us a target. Duke Kalen stepped forward, his expression one of deep, feigned concern. His smile was sharp as broken glass. Your Majesty, Lord Forlag speaks with a harsh tongue, but his heart is for our people, Kalen said smoothly. The girl is the source of this trouble. As long as she remains, this fire will grow. Valerius will not stop until he has her back, or has martyred himself trying. What is your proposal, Duke Kalen? Theron asked, his eyes narrowing. A compromise, Kalen said, spreading his hands. Valerius wants the girl. Give her to him, a public gesture of goodwill. We return the lost innocent and claim it was all a misunderstanding. We fade back into myth, and this storm passes. You would have me break a sworn oath? Theron's voice was dangerously quiet. We would have you choose the lives of your entire kingdom over the life of one mortal girl and a forgotten promise. Forlag burst out. Your duty is to us, not to the ghost of a human who died centuries ago. My duty is to my honor, Theron said, rising from the throne. Without it, I am not a king. I am merely the strongest beast in the pack. And my honor dictates that I protect the girl. Then you are a fool. Forlag spat, his decorum finally shattering. An old fool, clinging to archaic notions while the world changes around you. You will lead us all to ruin. Theron's gaze was like a physical blow. Forlag recoiled, his fury momentarily silenced by the sheer weight of the king's ancient authority. My decision is final, Theron stated. The girl stays. The defenses will be strengthened. This council is dismissed. He turned his back on them, a gesture of absolute finality. The nobles seethed, but none dared to challenge him further. They filed out of the chamber, their whispers a venomous cloud of dissent. Only Duke Kalen lingered for a moment, a flicker of triumphant cunning in his eyes before he masked it and departed. Unseen by the king, Alara had heard it all. She had grown restless in the library and had wandered out, seeking Theron. She had stood in the shadows of the corridor, listening to the heated exchange. They wanted to give her back to Valerius. They saw her as a disease, a plague that had infected their home. The thought of being returned to the Argent Bastion, to the warden's cold, righteous cruelty, was a terror beyond imagining. She retreated to the library, her heart pounding. A short while later, Captain Lyra entered the room. Her face was stern, but her eyes held a hint of something Alara couldn't quite read. Pity? Respect? The king is a fool, Lyra said, her voice blunt. He lets his honor blind him to the practical realities of our situation. Alara looked up, surprised by the captain's candor. But, Lyra continued, her gaze unwavering, He is my king, and his word is law. My loyalty is to him, and so I am loyal to his cause, which, at the moment, is you. She paused. Lord Forlag, however, is a pragmatist. He believes the king's path leads to our destruction. He has sent me to you with an offer. Alara's blood ran cold. An offer. There are hidden paths from the citadel, known only to a few, Lyra explained. Paths that lead deep into the wilderness. Far from here, far from the lands where Valerius holds influence. Lord Forlag offers you safe passage. He will have me escort you, give you supplies. You can disappear. Start a new life. It was a way out, a chance to escape, to be free from Valerius, from the hostile court, from this looming war. All she had to do was leave. It was a merciful offer, and it was also a threat. Leave or we will make you leave. Leave, and the king will be freed from his foolish oath. Leave and save us all from your trouble. Alara looked at the fire, at the books that lined the walls. She thought of Theron, kneeling before her, tending her wound. She thought of his cold fury at the brand Valerius had given her. She thought of his voice, echoing in the great hall. She is mine now. He had risked everything for her. For a promise made to a woman whose name he had likely not heard in 500 years. If she ran now, what would that make her? It would prove his court right. She would be just a frightened human, a liability who cared only for her own survival. And what of Theron? He would have risked a war for nothing. His authority would be shattered. His nobles, like Forlag and the cunning Kaelin, would see it as proof of his flawed judgment. His reign could be challenged. Valerius would win. He would spin her disappearance as a rescue, or as proof that the monster had devoured her. Either way, his holy war would have its fuel. Running wouldn't stop the war. It would only ensure Theron faced it alone, weakened and betrayed. This was her moment, her choice. She could be the victim, the pawn, the fugitive, or she could be something more. She met Lyra's gaze, and for the first time since she had arrived, her voice was not pleading or fearful. It was clear and firm, resolute. Tell Lord Forlag I thank him for his offer, she said. But I will not be leaving. Lyra's eyebrows raised in surprise. My place is here, Alara continued, a strength she didn't know she possessed rising within her. The warden started this war using my name. I will not run from it. I will stand with the king who gave me sanctuary. This act of defiance, this conscious choice to stay and fight, was the true turning point. She was no longer just the protected. She was an ally. A small flicker of a smile touched Captain Lyra's lips. I will deliver your message, she said, and a newfound respect had entered her voice. She turned and left Alara alone once more. But Alara no longer felt alone. She felt a sense of purpose. The war was coming, and she would face it. Her decision solidified Theron's resolve. When Lyra relayed her message, a rare, genuine warmth entered the king's eyes. The girl had courage. She was truly of Annalise's line. But Valerius was not content with a war of words alone. He had allied himself with a more insidious power. He had promised land, titles, and influence to an ambitious vampire noble who felt overshadowed by the king's long reign, Duke Kaelin. Kaelin, in secret, provided Valerius with the citadel's weaknesses, the timing of patrol shifts, the locations of lesser-used tunnels, and most importantly, the knowledge of ancient wards that could be bypassed with specific dark rituals. The attack came on the night of the new moon, under the cover of a blizzard that muffled all sound. Valerius did not lead a mob with pitchforks. He led a disciplined force of his elite purifier knights, their silver armor enchanted to resist vampire glamour, their swords blessed with holy water and etched with runes of banishment. And with them came human mages, practitioners of a dark, forbidden magic, their hands ready to tear down the ancient protections of the mountain. The alarm was a deep, resonant bell that tolled from the heart of the citadel. Its sound was a shock, a violation. The fortress had not been breached in 1,000 years. Theron was in the library with Alara when the bell rang. He was showing her an ancient star chart, explaining how the constellations had shifted over the millennia. At the first toll, he went unnaturally still. They are inside, he said, his voice a low whisper of disbelief and fury. He turned to Alara, his eyes blazing with a cold fire. "Stay here. Bar the door. Do not open it for anyone but me or Lyra." He was gone before she could reply, a blur of shadow moving faster than the human eye could follow. The sounds of battle erupted throughout the citadel. The clash of steel, the guttural shouts of men, the enraged snarls of vampires. Alara dragged a heavy table in front of the library doors, her heart pounding in her chest. She was trapped, but she refused to be helpless. She began to search the library, her eyes scanning the shelves, looking for, she didn't know what, a map, a secret, anything. Theron moved through his ancestral halls like a phantom of vengeance. This was not just an attack. It was a desecration. He saw his people, his ancient, proud nobles, fighting with a desperate fury against the invading humans. The purifiers were deadly. They fought in tight formations, their silver armor gleaming, their faith a weapon as potent as their steel. Theron became a whirlwind of controlled violence. He did not kill. That was the promise he made to himself, to the memory of Annalise, to the girl hiding in his library. He would not become the monster they claimed he was. He moved with supernatural speed and strength, his hands a blur. He shattered swords with a touch, broke limbs with calculated, precise strikes. He disarmed and disabled, leaving a trail of unconscious or writhing purifiers in his wake. He was magnificent, terrifying, a king protecting his home. Captain Lyra fought at his side, a deadly dance of silver blades and shadow. She was less restrained, her twin swords flashing as she cut down those who threatened her king. But the invaders were too many, and they knew the layout of the citadel too well. Their target was clear, the throne room, the heart of the kingdom. Valerius, flanked by his personal guard and Duke Kalen, breached the throne room doors. "The king is old," Kalen shouted to the other vampires who had secretly joined his cause. "His sentimentality has made him weak. A new era begins tonight." Theron arrived moments later, his face a mask of cold rage. "Kalen," he said, his voice echoing with the weight of betrayed centuries. "Traitor," Kalen laughed. "Pragmatist, Theron. You clung to the past. I am seizing the future." Valerius pointed a silver-wrought crossbow at Theron. "Your reign of darkness is over, beast." As the forces clashed in the throne room, Alara made a discovery. Tucked away in an alcove was a series of architectural plans for the citadel, old scrolls detailing its construction. One scroll showed the intricate patterns of the defensive wards woven into the very stones of the mountain. She saw the main ward, a complex matrix of energy that sealed the gates. But she also saw smaller, auxiliary lines like capillaries running through the entire structure. And she saw a notation, written in Theron's own elegant script, next to a junction point located directly beneath the throne. Conduit focus, integrity anchor. She didn't understand the magical theory, but she understood the implication. The entire defense system was anchored by a single point. At that moment, she heard a sound from a tapestry on the far side of the library, a scraping of stone.
Un secret passage.
She grabbed the heaviest book she could find and hid in the shadows. A purifier knight, tasked by Kalen to find her, slipped into the room. He wore the same uniform as the others, but on his gauntlet was a small, almost invisible sigil.
A stylized?
Kalen's personal guard, and she recognized another symbol etched into his armor, a swirling pattern she had seen Valerius's mages painting on the walls as they advanced. It was a rune of unmaking. They weren't just bypassing the wards. They were poisoning them, corrupting them from the inside. And if the anchor point beneath the throne was corrupted, the entire mountain's defenses would collapse. Not just collapse. They would feedback, implode. The mountain itself could be brought down. This wasn't a coup. It was an extermination. Kalen didn't want the throne. He wanted to be the sole surviving noble, inheriting the ashes under Valerius's patronage. She had to warn Theron. With a scream of desperation, she threw the heavy tome at the knight, catching him by surprise. As he stumbled, she ran past him, out the secret door, and into the corridors. She ran toward the sound of battle in the throne room. She burst through a side entrance, a small figure in a vast, violent tableau. "Theron!" she screamed. He turned his head for a fraction of a second, his eyes widening as he saw her. That fraction of a second was all Valerius needed. He fired the crossbow. The silver-tipped bolt, trailing a faint wisp of white smoke, flew straight towards Theron's heart. Lyra cried out a warning, but Theron did not move to dodge it. He moved to shield Alara. He threw himself in front of her, his body taking the impact. The bolt sank deep into his shoulder, missing his heart by inches. A sizzling sound filled the air as the blessed silver burned his flesh. He staggered, a pained snarl twisting his features. "The throne!" Alara screamed, pointing a trembling finger. "Kaelin's mages! They're not bypassing the wards. They're corrupting them. The anchor!" Understanding dawned on Theron's face, followed by cold fury. Kaelin's plan was revealed. The traitor's face went pale. He had underestimated the human girl. With a roar of rage, Theron ripped the bolt from his shoulder. He ignored the searing pain, ignored Valerius, and launched himself at Kaelin. The fight was not long. Kaelin was ancient and powerful, but Theron was the king. His fury was the fury of a betrayed brother, of a protector whose home had been violated. He disarmed Kaelin and slammed him against the obsidian throne. The other treacherous vampires, seeing their leader defeated and his true plan exposed, faltered. Loyalist forces, led by Lyra, quickly subdued them. Valerius, his plan collapsing, screamed in fanatical rage and charged Theron, a blessed dagger in his hand. Theron, his back to the warden, did not even turn. A shadow detached itself from the wall. Lord Forlag, the skeptical, pragmatic advisor, moved with a speed that belied his age. He caught Valerius's arm, twisted it, and slammed the warden to the floor, knocking him unconscious. "My king may be a sentimental fool," Forlag snarled, breathing heavily, "but he is my king. And you, human, have defiled our home." The battle was over. The remaining purifiers, their leaders defeated, surrendered. The traitor's plot had failed. The antagonist was defeated, brought down by his own hubris and treacherous alliances. The throne room was a wreck of shattered furniture and unconscious bodies. In the sudden, ringing silence, Theron turned to Alara. His shoulder was a mess of burned flesh and dark, sluggishly flowing blood. He walked toward her, his expression unreadable. He stopped in front of her, the towering, wounded king and the small, brave human. He reached out, not to his wound, but to gently brush a stray lock of hair from her face. "You saved us," he said, his voice rough with pain and something else. "Oh, you saved us all." In the quiet aftermath, the full scope of Kaelin's betrayal became clear. The prisoners were secured in the deepest cells, the wounded of both sides tended to. Theron, his shoulder bandaged but his strength clearly diminished, sat not on his throne, but on the steps leading up to it. Alara sat beside him, the adrenaline fading, leaving only a deep, trembling exhaustion. Lyra and Forlag stood before them, a silent, united front. "You were right to question my judgment, Forlag," Theron said, his voice weary. "My honor did blind me. I did not see the viper in our midst." Forlag bowed his head, a gesture of profound respect. "And I was wrong to doubt your honor, my king. It was that very honor that inspired the loyalty that saved us." His eyes flickered toward Alara. From an unexpected quarter, Theron looked at Alara, a soft light in his storm-gray eyes. "You have reminded me of something I had long forgotten," he confessed, his voice low, for her alone. "That strength is not the power to command, but the courage to protect. That a kingdom is not stone and shadow, but the bonds of loyalty that hold it together." He admitted she had changed him. She had reawakened the long-lost part of his soul that believed in something more than just survival. "What will you do now?" she asked quietly. His gaze swept over the damaged throne room, over the faces of his most trusted advisors. "I will do what I should have done long ago," he said. "I will lead." 3 days later, Theron convened his entire court in the Grand Hall. It was a somber affair. The traitors, including a disgraced Kaelin, were brought forth. Their judgment was swift. Not death, exile. a fate worse than death for beings who craved community and power. Then, Theron stood before his people, Elara at his side. She was no longer dressed in rags, but in a simple, dark blue gown provided by Lyra. She was not a prisoner or a petitioner. She was an honored guest, an ally. For millennia, we have hidden, Theron began, his voice ringing with renewed power. We have watched the world of men from the shadows, priding ourselves on our isolation. We called it wisdom. It was fear. He paused, his gaze sweeping over every face. That era is over. The actions of one human, Warden Valerius, have shown us the danger of allowing evil to fester in the world unchallenged. The courage of another, he gestured to Elara, has shown us the power of honor and alliance. I hereby issue a new decree. The oath of Annalise is no longer a personal debt. It is now the law of this kingdom. Our gates will no longer be sealed to the outside world. They will be open. A wave of shock and murmurs went through the court. We declare this citadel a sanctuary, Theron boomed, his voice silencing all dissent. Any innocent, human or otherwise, fleeing unjust persecution, may seek refuge here. We will protect them. We will offer them our strength. We will no longer be a myth to be feared, but a haven to be sought. This was the new order, a fundamental, game-changing shift in their entire society. He was integrating her human values of compassion and protection for the innocent into his ancient, non-human world. Lord Forlag, the eternal skeptic, stared at his king, and then at the young woman beside him. He saw not weakness, but a new, more profound strength. He was the first to drop to one knee. My king, he said, his voice thick with emotion. One by one, the rest of the court followed his lead. Captain Lyra knelt, a proud smile on her face. The entire ancient, powerful, and previously hostile court bowed in submission. Their respect for their king, and for the human who had changed him, solidified in that moment. Months later, the world outside was changing. The Argent Order, its leader captured and its treacherous alliance with the Shadow World exposed, fractured. Valerius's propaganda was replaced by a new story. A tale of the sanctuary of the Mountain King, a place where the hunted could find safety. It was met with disbelief and fear at first, but then they started to arrive. A family of refugees fleeing a border war. A scholar persecuted for heretical writings. A young man with forbidden magical talents. Humans seeking safety in a vampire's den. A small, thriving village began to grow at the foot of the mountain, under the king's watchful protection. A community of the dispossessed, both human and vampire, learning to coexist. One evening, Elara stood with Theron on the high balcony of his study, looking down at the twinkling lights of the new village below. She was no longer a victim. She was a leader in her own right, an ambassador, a counselor, a bridge between two worlds. Her relationship with Theron had deepened into a partnership of profound trust and unspoken affection. A bond forged in desperation, tempered in battle, and solidified in the creation of a new world. It's beautiful, she said, watching the smoke curl from the village chimneys. It is a beginning, Theron replied, his voice a soft rumble beside her. He no longer looked so weary. The profound emptiness in his eyes had been replaced by a sense of purpose. You gave them hope, Elara said. He turned to her, the starlight catching the silver in his dark hair. No, he said, his voice full of a warmth she never would have thought possible. You gave me hope, a single act of courage, a desperate plea for an old and honorable promise, had not just saved one life. It had reawakened a kingdom's dormant soul, and in the heart of the ancient mountain, a new and lasting peace had finally begun to grow.